Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are back to Stellaris, Sharia, now version 2.0.4. I believe this was the patch that I was playing last time. We've had a little bit of a period of time away from Stellaris, not for any lack of interest in the game, but obviously with the release of BattleTech. And then there was one night where I wasn't able to stream, unfortunately. It's been a little while since we've gone back to this level, so as usual we'll do a recap, maybe a little bit more of a substantial one than normal. I think the new patch, I'm pretty sure this was introduced in 2.04, for whatever reason doesn't show the background image at the full resolution, so I have to contend with this. It's purely cosmetic. It hasn't affected anything inside the game, but hopefully that gets fixed. For those of you that don't know, the next story pack has been announced. I believe it's called Distant Stars, and it's there's a weird reaction whenever story packs get announced. So the first one was Leviathans, and for those of you who perhaps have been playing from the beginning, you may remember that Leviathans came along with the Kennedy patch, which introduced the Horizon signal. Even if you didn't get Leviathans, you got the Horizon signal, and that, of course, was one of the projects that Alexis Kennedy of Cultist Simulator fame. That's one of the things that he did while he was, I think his way of putting it, while he was going Ronin. So it's I think of them very fondly, but it seems like there were a few people who are kind of like, I'm gonna miss this one, because their view was that, well, if it's just additional anomalies or something like that, then it's not really worth spending too much time looking into. And I find that a great shame, because I think it misses the point of the game, and something that really has been pretty important for Stellaris ever since we got the Apocalypse expansion. You're no longer able to sort of explore with fleets anymore. You have to use your your ships. It's a little bit like those first turns in Civilization, where you have a settler and you have to move through, and you make the most of the situation that you find yourself in. So I sometimes find it a little curious when people have this reception of, oh, it's only anomalies, because so much of this game is about, finding the anomalies and reacting to them. And I mean, they did a poll on the Stellaris Twitter, asking people sort of what their favorite anomalies or events were, and Horizon Signal won hands down, perhaps not very surprisingly. But it's kind of, in my view, it's important to remember this stuff, because it's very easy to take some of this for granted, I think. But the, like, diversity in terms of anomalies and such is something that keeps the game fresh and keeps it really interesting to keep playing. So, and there's other ideas that are coming in Distant Stars. If you're interested in it, you can definitely check out the blog posts, or not blog posts, the dev diaries on the Paradox forums. But for now, we're going to focus on our game. So for those of you who don't recall, this is the Zukukan Cabal. It's basically a group of space pirates. I wasn't as happy, excuse me, I wasn't as happy with the story that I came up this time, but Camdor's history is one of rival fleets competing for the ocean's few islands. Ports and land brought wealth, but also the raids of other pirate fleets, giving rise to an ancient and respected naval tradition among the Zukukan. Recognizing the value of plunder and always short on crew, the Pirate King sought to subdue their foes with as little damage to their future plunder as slaves as possible, a habit that continues to this day. Today marks a new chapter in the history of the Zukukan, united under the admiralty of Pirate Queen Primkrek, the species takes its first steps to the stars, seeking new worlds and the riches that they may bring. So our glorious leader who brought us to the stars has since died. The traits of the species: ocean preference. They're thrifty, they're quick learners, but they are slow breeders. This was sort of the justification for wanting to be careful and to take as many slaves as possible. Their governing ethics are fanatic, authoritarian, and militarist. And the civics were barbaric despoilers and slaver guilds. And of course, because Paradox games always have a wonderful sense of humor, they are a bunch of salty sea dogs. Happiness plus 5% for another 30 years. And currently we have slave optimizations. Now, we don't have a lot of slaves. And as the title suggests, I do have war in mind. But we'll talk a little bit about that kind of in the future. Let me think. Well, you know what? I think it's probably best just to jump into it. So, in terms of a recap, we began on Camdecor, and obviously we just sort of expanded out as rapidly as we could. The Zum entity was the only thing that we'd really seen, and we had a chance to sort of drill into them pretty early on. So we got an early advantage, which we've been able to exploit. And where they managed to sort of cut us off at one batch of sort of hyperlanes, but we were able to sort of seize them, and so as a result, they're sort of stuck underneath us. We do still count as equivalent, but obviously we don't really have anything to fear from them fleet power-wise. So for this, we managed to complete a sort of an expansion down to the edge of the galaxy. Eventually, I would like to move out to the right, but of course, we've got the Skrek Reavers, which will cause us a little bit of difficulty, and then the Raltec royal commonalities. I don't have a ton to fear from them right now. They do count as inferior, but they obviously control quite a bit of territory. They do have a gateway, and I mean, the fact of the matter is that I have quite a bit on my plate at the moment. I'm expanding out in several directions. I have now got a few people who are directly neighboring me. And while I don't immediately fear any of my neighbors, it is also important to keep in mind that with the changes that have been brought in since Apocalypse, you do actually want to be careful in terms of where you're placing your fleets, and just generally, you know, keeping an eye in terms of where your immediate threats are. So again, I don't have a whole lot to lose here right now. I'm generally okay with where this is. Actually, there is a side of me that says we are going to be going to war relatively soon, I think. So there is a side of me that thinks I should combine the Greki Armada with the IP Armada. Drawback is my naval capacity isn't what it should be right now. Anyways, we'll think about that. We'll think about that for now and move on. So my immediate goals of sort of acquiring as many resources as I can and getting some prime real estate have more or less been fulfilled. As you can see, sort of the northern area is mine. We will have a few contests in terms of just seeing what the borders with the Raltec Royal Commonalities wind up being. And a large part of my job to the east is going to be sort of scouting things out and seeing where the best opportunities lie. I'd like to ideally get some good choke points to defend the borders, as well as getting my hands on some resources. It is important, you know, just to keep an eye. Right now, this is an arid world, so I know that basically arid worlds, desert worlds are going to be things that they want. So for instance, they might want to take this area, but I don't really know any sort of, I don't have a lot of information in terms of what's immediately here. So I don't know whether or not they're going to want to go to the north or go down. They're probably not going to go too far into barbarian territory. So they're going to go west and bump into me, or they're going to go north. And I've sort of plotted out a temporary border along these lines. So we're going to continue on just sort of expanding out. I've got a few construction ships kind of making their moves up here. I do also need to have I've got a science ship doing some exploration, and I want to make sure that I get these gateways locked down as well. This is an Arctic world, so I'm not going to be able to take advantage of that. But you'll also notice for my resources, something like a 10 energy system is a pretty good one for me to have, because I've definitely put a lot of effort into improving my minerals. Hello, Masimagoma. I've definitely put a lot of effort into gaining mineral resources, but this has come at the cost that I'm not really able to sustain a fleet away from bases for a long time. And this is going to be a problem because, as the title suggests, I have a little bit of a problem with one of my neighbors, which I'll explain in a moment. So, a few goals. I want to expand my borders, especially with a mind to gaining some energy resources. I've been getting a bit of a deficit, and it's time to... I've been running a bit of a deficit, so it's time to start paying that back and get my treasury up. As you can see, I only have 78 energy at the moment, and I'm only gaining about 8 a turn, which is not great. But I am, of course, doing quite well with minerals. And one of the reasons why I've got this kind of this division in place is I know that I can build energy generating buildings with minerals, but it's very difficult to build buildings that'll generate more minerals with energy. So that's by design, but I do need to pay that back. And of course, it's important to remember that I'm also going to be confronted with the fact that as I expand out my borders, those are going to cost 1 energy each. Furthermore, another difficulty that I'm going to run into is that because I'm trying to blob out as best as I can, but you can sort of see some of these straight lines forming. Another drawback that I'm going to encounter is it's more likely that pirate fleets will emerge. And so I want to make sure that if I'm building improvements, I want to build them in areas that are protected from pirates or have somewhat easy access. Or the fleets have somewhat easy access. Incidentally, are these guys... I don't think these guys are parked in the right system. Yeah, there isn't a spaceport here. So this will help me a little bit with my my expenses. Upgrading them seems to make as much sense as anything. Alright, so what is the Thucydides Trap? For those of you who haven't attended to your classics, Thucydides was a historian from ancient Greece. He recorded the Peloponnesian War, so if you've ever heard of a gentleman named Pericles, that was that particular point in time. It was where Athens and Sparta went to war. And there's a concept, and it's one that most recently it sort of gets spoken of in reference to the United States and China. And sort of the common read of Thucydides is that his account of the Peloponnesian War says, basically this is, people are referring to Thucydides when they say this, but their reading of Thucydides is that you have an established power and you have an emerging power, and that if it's not inevitable, it's at least very likely that the established power will resent the growth of the emerging power, and this will lead to war. And that's ultimately what, that's kind of the account of the Peloponnesian War, and it's a war that did not go well for Athens in the end. In fact, it's suggested that the reason why Socrates was found guilty was that he was the only figure that the people of Athens felt they could sort of... He's kind of a bit of a sacrificial lamb for the losses felt by the Peloponnesian War, that they couldn't get any of the powerful political figures who were responsible for it, and so they sort of got their revenge on Socrates. I'm not sure how true that is or not, but it's a bit of in this case, it's a bit of a limited interpretation in this game here. But basically, I have done a defensive pact with the Techerus Matrix. Now, the main reason for this is that I'm barbaric to spoilers, so people just generally don't like me. I maybe won't pay attention to my my neighbor, who I've been to war with several times, but let's take the Glost Wareni autocracy. Okay, so, you know, militarists, so I should get along reasonably well with them in that regard. I don't have any real opinions about materialism. But as you can see here, we've got a -20 modifier. We don't have any border friction or anything along these lines. But the fact that I'm a barbaric despoiler means that they start off with a -20 view of us. And you'll notice pretty much everyone in the galaxy doesn't like me. The Losvada League really doesn't like me. And this is because they are egalitarian spiritualists. We've got border fiction, we've got a slavery policy, we're authoritarian, we've closed our borders to them, we're a rival, we're allied to their rival, and we're a barbaric despoiler. So, I mean, I've already taken some diplomatic efforts to make things somewhat hostile between us. And that's mostly because if you rival somebody in Stellaris, you gain some extra influence. The important thing is this: these guys are they're pretty well situated. They've got I've been catching up in terms of systems. They've got 5 currently, and they're expanding out their borders. What's a little bit more important here is that, unlike the Zoom entity, these guys don't like me. And these guys have won the opportunity to swallow up the Techerus Matrix, so that's why I agreed to a defensive pact with them. But furthermore, they're going to be able to expand out to the west, which is going to be a little bit difficult for me to manage. And so it's very easy for me to see that these guys can get to a point where they are a bit of a problem. And so again, seeing these guys as a rising power, I actually want to sort of chop them down as quickly as I can. If we take a look, their fleet power currently is inferior, but their technology level is equivalent. And again, because they've been more on the ball in terms of getting their bases set up, they actually have superior naval capacity. Now, what I would normally do is declare war on them right away. But again, I've got 78 energy credits in my treasury. That's really not going to help me out when it comes time to do the war thing. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making sure that this fleet is sort of in tip-top shape. I'm going to be trying to expand out my fleets as best as I can. And we're going to be spending the next few turns generating enough energy to declare war on these guys. And my main goal actually won't even necessarily be to claim some planets, although I'll wind up doing that as well. Looks like I have got some frame drops. Jesse Quill, thank you very much for the host. We were just talking about the Thucydides Trap. Do you know what the Thucydides Trap is? As it happens, this planet is on my way, but the one thing I'd really like to do would be to claim Savasik, Pildram, Edrovang, and Wolgan at least. Because this will cut them off from their western expansion. This will ensure that I gain these high mineral star systems. This is from the mining droids event. I'll also gain this one. So, but most importantly, this will basically sort of cut off their expansion options. The only other ways they'll be able to expand will be declaring war on the Techerus, which, you know, I'm not